Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I need to tell you about an incident I experienced in 2017, because every time I drive through the Mojave Desert at night, I still think about it, and it happens more often than I'd like. I've been using these routes for 15 years, starting when I was 23, and back then I was inexperienced enough to think the open road was romantic or something like that. It's not. There's just asphalt, diesel fumes, and the same rest stops, to the point where you can't remember which state you're in without checking your GPS. But that night, I remember every detail of that particular trip as if it happened yesterday, not 7 years ago. I think it was late March, maybe early April. I was transporting household appliances from somewhere in California, I think it was Bakersfield, but I'm not entirely sure now, to a warehouse outside Phoenix. Refrigerators, washing machines, that sort of thing. Heavy load, nothing interesting. I had probably done this route many times before. The Mojave region is always the worst part because there's nothing there. Just darkness and more darkness. And if something goes wrong, you're in trouble until sunrise, or until someone happens to pass by, which isn't very likely at 3 in the morning. The thing is, my headlights were shit. I'd been meaning to get them replaced for months, but you know how it is. You keep putting things off because you're tired or broke or both, and then suddenly you're out there in the pitch black, realizing just how bad they actually are. During the day, it didn't matter much, and on well-lit highways I could get by. But out there in the desert with no other cars around, no streetlights, nothing, it was like driving through a tunnel with a dying flashlight. I had to squint constantly, leaning forward over the steering wheel trying to make out the road ahead, and every few minutes I'd get this spike of anxiety thinking I was about to drift off the asphalt into the scrub. I considered pulling over and waiting for dawn. I really did. There's a rest stop about 40 miles west of the Arizona border, and I thought about just parking there for a couple of hours, maybe catching some sleep. But I was already behind schedule and I needed the money. I was going through some personal shit at the time, divorce stuff, and my ex was taking me to court over support payments, and I just couldn't afford to miss a delivery window. So I kept driving, even though I knew it probably wasn't safe. I told myself it would be fine. It was basically a straight shot anyway. How hard could it be? The highway out there is empty in a way that's hard to explain if you've never experienced it. It's not just that there aren't other cars, it's that there's no sign of human existence at all. No houses, no gas stations, no cell towers blinking in the distance. Just sand and rocks and the occasional Joshua tree lit up for a second in your headlights before disappearing back into the black. The silence is almost physical. You know what I mean? Even with the engine rumbling and the tires on the road, there's this underlying quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I had the radio on for a while, but I couldn't get anything except static and occasional fragments of Mexican stations that would fade in and out. Eventually, I just turned it off. The CB was silent too, not even the usual late-night chatter you sometimes get from other drivers. It was just me and the dark and the road. I think it was around 4:30 in the morning when I saw it. I'd been driving for hours at that point, fighting to keep my eyes open, drinking bad coffee from a thermos that had gone lukewarm. The sun was still maybe an hour from coming up. I was doing that thing where you sort of zone out, not quite falling asleep but not fully awake either, just existing in this weird in-between state where the road becomes hypnotic and you stop thinking about anything at all. Then my headlights caught something up ahead. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote or a deer, and I felt my stomach drop because hitting something at 70 miles an hour in a loaded semi is not a situation you want to find yourself in. I slammed on the brakes, probably harder than I should have, and the whole rig shuddered and groaned as the wheels locked up. The smell of burning rubber filled the cab. I was bracing for impact, hands tight on the wheel, when the truck finally stopped. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't an animal, it was a car. A red Ford Fusion, looked pretty new, sitting right in the middle of the highway, not on the shoulder, not pulled off to the side, but directly on the double yellow line like someone had just parked it there and walked away. The hazard lights were blinking, those orange lights flashing in a steady rhythm that somehow made the whole scene feel even more surreal. And the passenger door was hanging wide open. I'd stopped maybe a foot away from hitting it. Another second of reaction time and I would have plowed right into the thing. My hands were shaking as I put the semi in a park and just sat there staring at the car through my windshield. The hazard lights kept blinking. Click, flash, click, flash. That was the only sound other than my own breathing and the idle of my engine. My first thought was that someone needed help. Maybe they'd broken down and gone looking for assistance, though why they'd leave the car in the middle of the road instead of pushing it to the shoulder, I couldn't figure out. Maybe they'd had some kind of medical emergency. Maybe they were hurt and wandering around in the desert in the dark. I'm not the kind of guy who just drives past someone who might be in trouble, you know? I was raised better than that. I reversed the truck and pulled over onto the shoulder, leaving my headlights pointed at the Fusion so I could see what I was doing. I thought about putting out some flares in case another vehicle came along, but I hadn't seen a single car in hours, and I didn't think it was worth the time. I grabbed my flashlight from under the seat, checked that my phone was in my pocket even though I knew there was no signal out here, and climbed down from the cab. The air outside was warmer than I expected, that desert warmth that lingers even in the middle of the night. But what struck me most was how still everything was. No wind at all, not even a breeze. The kind of stillness that feels wrong somehow, like the world is holding its breath. The only sound was that clicking from the hazard lights and my boots on the asphalt as I walked toward the Fusion. I approached it slowly, flashlight in one hand, suddenly feeling a lot less confident about this whole situation. The passenger door was open at maybe a 45-degree angle, like someone had pushed it open and then just left it that way. I could see the interior light was on, casting a pale yellow glow. I walked around to the driver's side first, shining my flashlight through the windows, and that's when I realized the car was completely empty. No driver, no passengers, no one in the front seats, no one in the back. I checked twice, even opened the back door and looked underneath the seats thinking maybe someone had collapsed or was hiding, but there was nothing. The car was just sitting there in the middle of the highway, engine off, but keys in the ignition, passenger door hanging open, and not a single person in sight. I stood there next to the car feeling increasingly uneasy. The rational part of my brain was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe someone had gotten into an accident and wandered off in shock. Maybe they'd been picked up by another driver. Maybe they'd walked to get help and would be back any minute. But none of those explanations fit with what I was seeing. Why would you leave your car in the middle of the road? Why was the door open like that? Where the hell would you even walk to out here? I kept glancing over my shoulder, back toward my truck, then out into the darkness on either side of the highway. My flashlight beam didn't reach very far, maybe 20 or 30 feet before it just dissolved into the black. Anyone could have been standing out there watching me and I wouldn't have known. The smart thing would have been to get back in my truck and call the highway patrol once I got somewhere with cell service. Let them deal with it. But I was already committed at this point, and something about the whole situation was bugging me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, and I wanted to understand what had happened here. I looked inside the car again, more carefully this time. Everything seemed normal. There was a phone charger plugged into the cigarette lighter, a couple of empty water bottles in the cup holders, some receipts and napkins in the center console. On the passenger seat was a woman's jacket, one of those light windbreaker things. The car didn't look ransacked or disturbed. It just looked like someone had been driving and then suddenly decided to stop in the most dangerous possible place. That's when I noticed the trunk. I walked around to the back of the car and tried the handle, but it was locked. I stood there for a moment, debating. The keys were still in the ignition. I could pop the trunk if I wanted to. But did I want to? What if there was something in there I didn't want to see? I'm not sure why I decided to do it. Curiosity, I guess. Or maybe just that same impulse that had made me stop in the first place. I went back to the driver's door, reached in, and grabbed the keys from the ignition. The car made that dinging sound when you open the door with the keys in it, loud in the silent desert, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I walked back to the trunk and put the key in the lock. It turned. I heard the mechanism click, but when I tried to lift the trunk, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck somehow, or jammed, or something was holding it closed from the inside. I pulled harder, putting my weight into it, but it wouldn't move. I stood there frowning at the trunk for a moment, then went back and opened the rear passenger door. There's usually a way to access the trunk from the back seat if you fold the seats down, and sure enough, when I pulled the seat release, the backrest flopped forward, and I could see into the trunk space. There were 3 garbage bags in there. Big black contractor bags, the heavy-duty kind, all tied shut. And there was a rope running between them and the trunk latch, which explained why I couldn't open it from the outside. Someone had tied the trunk closed from the inside. I remember standing there with the car door open, staring at those bags, feeling the first real prickle of fear run down my spine. Something was very wrong here. People don't tie their trunks shut from the inside for no reason. And what was in those bags? They were kind of lumpy and irregular, filled with something that had weight to it. I reached out toward one of the bags. I don't know what I was planning to do, untie it maybe, or just touch it to see if I could tell what was inside. My hand was maybe 6 inches away when the gunshot went off. The sound was so loud in that silent desert that I jerked back and slammed my head on the roof of the car, hard enough that I saw stars. For a second, I couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened, my ears ringing from the shot. Then instinct took over, and I stumbled backward away from the car, adrenaline flooding my system. Someone shouted. A man's voice, rough and angry, yelling, "Hey!" from somewhere in the darkness. The voice sounded like it was getting closer fast. I didn't think, I just ran. I threw the keys onto the front seat of the Fusion and sprinted back toward my semi, my boots pounding on the asphalt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the voice behind me yelling, "Hey!" again and again, and it sounded like it was getting closer. I reached my truck and practically threw myself into the cab, yanking the door shut behind me and fumbling with the keys in the ignition. The engine stalled the first time I tried to start it. I cursed, turned the key again, and heard it grind and catch. I threw the truck into gear and started to pull out just as my headlights caught the figure standing by the Fusion. It was a man, short and stocky, with red hair visible even in the poor light. He was wearing overalls and rubber boots that came up to his knees, the kind you wear when you're wading through something you don't want to get on your clothes. In his left hand, he was holding a small folding shovel, the kind campers use. In his right hand was a hunting rifle, old-looking with a wooden stock. Our eyes met for just a second as the truck rolled forward. I expected him to look crazy, wild-eyed and threatening, but he didn't. He looked worried, scared even. He had this expression on his face like he was the one who'd been caught doing something wrong and wasn't sure what to do about it. As I passed him, he dropped the shovel and started waving his hands, gesturing for me to stop. He was yelling something I couldn't hear over the engine, and then he actually started running after the truck, his boots slapping on the road, his mouth moving as he shouted. I watched him in the rearview mirror for a few seconds before I lost sight of him as he sprinted back toward the Fusion. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the semi faster than I should have on that dark road with those shitty headlights, not caring about anything except putting distance between me and whatever the hell was happening back there. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My head throbbed where I'd hit it on the car. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, expecting to see headlights following me, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I drove for maybe 5 minutes before I saw them. Headlights in the mirror, coming up fast behind me. Way too fast for normal highway driving. The Fusion was coming after me. I've never been so scared in my entire life. My heart was slamming against my ribs and my mouth had gone completely dry. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, not even sure if it would go through out here, but somehow it connected. The dispatcher answered, and I started talking, trying to explain what was happening while watching those headlights get closer and closer in the mirror. The Fusion was gaining on me, despite the fact that I was doing almost 80 in a fully loaded semi. "There's a car chasing me," I said, hearing how my voice was shaking. "On Highway 95 in the Mojave, I don't know exactly where, somewhere between Needles and the border. Red Ford Fusion, guy has a gun, The Fusion was right on my tail now, close enough that I could see it clearly in my mirrors. The horn started blaring, just laying on it continuously, and the sound was so loud and sudden that I nearly swerved off the road. The dispatcher was saying something, but I could barely hear her over the horn and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. The Fusion right behind me, horn blaring, me trying to keep the truck steady and not let panic make me do something stupid like brake or swerve. I kept expecting to feel the impact of the car ramming into me, or to hear another gunshot, but neither happened. The guy just kept following me, close enough to touch, horn screaming into the night. Then he suddenly pulled out and swung around to pass me on the left. For a second I thought maybe he was giving up, but then he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, hard. I had no choice but to slow down. If I'd kept going, I would have rear-ended him, and in a loaded semi that would have been catastrophic for both of us. I started braking, feeling the truck shudder as the weight shifted, watching the Fusion's taillights get brighter as I closed the distance. I was maybe 10 feet away from plowing into him when I saw flashing red and blue lights ahead. The Fusion immediately veered off to the right, leaving the highway and bouncing into the desert scrub. I watched in my mirror as it disappeared into the darkness, just gone like it had never been there at all. I slowed the truck down and pulled over, my whole body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. A highway patrol car pulled up behind me and an officer got out. I sat there in the cab for a minute, trying to calm down enough to talk, before I climbed down to meet him. The officer was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked more annoyed than concerned as I started explaining what had happened. He took notes while I talked, occasionally asking questions, but he didn't seem particularly interested in pursuing the Fusion. When I suggested he could probably catch up to the guy if he left right now, he just shook his head and said they'd do a thorough search once backup arrived. They needed to get my full statement first. I was furious. This guy had chased me down the highway with a rifle and they were worried about paperwork. But there was nothing I could do except give my statement and hope they'd actually follow up. The officer said they'd call me if they had any updates and sent me on my way. They never called. I checked in a few times over the next couple of weeks, but I never heard anything. No arrest, no explanation, nothing. The whole thing just disappeared into whatever bureaucratic void these things go to when nobody wants to deal with them. I've told this story more times than I can count. All my buddies have heard it. Most people assume the guy was burying bodies out there in the desert, though I'm not sure that really makes sense. The shovel was too small for digging a grave, even if you were planning to do it in pieces. And why would he chase me down if he was just trying to hide evidence? Why not just let me go and move the car somewhere else? Some people think he was burying animals, maybe putting down diseased livestock or disposing of something illegal like endangered species. That makes more sense to me than murder, though I can't really explain why. Maybe because of the look on his face. He didn't look like a killer. He looked scared and desperate and like he was in over his head with something. For my own peace of mind, I've tried to convince myself it was something relatively innocent. Maybe he was illegally dumping trash and panicked when I showed up. Maybe he was burying something valuable and thought I was trying to rob him. Maybe the rifle wasn't even loaded and he was just trying to scare me off. But I don't really believe any of that. I think whatever was in those bags was bad. The kind of bad that makes you tie your trunk shut from the inside and park in the middle of a highway at 4 a.m, where nobody's supposed to be. I think he was out there digging in the desert and heard my truck coming and barely had time to get back to the road before I arrived. I think I interrupted something that I really didn't want to be part of. The thing I can't stop thinking about is those boots, those rubber boots that came up to his knees. What do you need boots like that for in the desert? Unless you're wading through something. Blood, maybe, or whatever other fluids come out of bodies when you're cutting them up into garbage bag-sized pieces. I still drive through the Mojave at night sometimes, though I try to avoid it when I can. Every time I do, I find myself looking at the side of the road, wondering if I'm passing the spot where it happened. I got new headlights installed the next week, the brightest ones I could afford, and I've never let them go bad since. And I never stop for abandoned cars anymore, no matter how much it might look like someone needs help. Sometimes, late at night when I'm hauling through empty stretches of highway, I think about those 3 bags in the trunk. I think about what might have been in them. I think about the rope tying the trunk shut, and the way that rifle looked in the headlights and the expression on that man's face, right before he started chasing me. Mostly, though, I think about how close I came to opening one of those bags. My hand was 6 inches away. Another few seconds and I would have untied it and looked inside and seen whatever it was he didn't want anyone to see. Would he have shot me then? Would I have ended up in the desert in pieces in another set of garbage bags? I don't know. I'm glad I don't know. But sometimes at 3 a.m, when the road is empty and the darkness presses in from all sides, I wonder if he's still out there. If he found another spot in the desert to dig his holes. If some other driver with bad headlights might stumble across that red Fusion parked in the middle of the highway with its passenger door hanging open. And I wonder if next time, that driver will be curious enough to look in the trunk, or smart enough to drive away. I wonder if they'll make it 6 inches before the gunshot rings out, or if they'll get a little closer, close enough to see what's inside those bags, close enough that running won't help anymore. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. In the dream, I'm back there on that empty highway and I'm reaching for the bag and I can hear footsteps coming up behind me, but I can't move fast enough. I never see what's in the bag before I wake up, and I'm grateful for that. Whatever it was, whatever he was hiding, I think some things are better left unknown. The sun came up about an hour after I left that scene, and I remember thinking how normal everything looked in the daylight. Just another stretch of highway through the desert, nothing special, nothing scary. But I knew what was out there in the dark, just off the side of the road. I knew someone had been digging in the sand while I drove past, and that knowledge sits in my gut like a stone. I made my delivery in Phoenix on time, which was the important thing according to my dispatcher. He didn't care about the story when I tried to tell him. He just wanted to know if the load was intact. and if I'd need to file any insurance claims. I said no, the load was fine, and he told me to get some sleep and be ready for the next run in 12 hours. That's the thing about this job. The miles keep coming and you keep driving, and none of the weird shit that happens out there really matters as long as you make your deliveries on time. You could see a UFO or a Bigfoot or a dead body on the side of the road, and as long as you don't crash your truck, your dispatcher just wants to know when you'll be at the next warehouse. So I slept for a few hours in a truck stop parking lot with my doors locked and my phone within reach, and then I got up and did it all over again. Because that's the job. You drive and you sleep and you drive some more, and you try not to think too hard about the things you see out there in the dark. But I do think about it. All the time. Every single time I drive through the Mojave at night, I think about that red fusion and those 3 bags, and that man with the shovel and the rifle. I think about how the only sound was the clicking of the hazard lights and how still the air was and how wrong everything felt, even before I saw the gun. And I think about the fact that I never got an explanation. The cops never called me back, never arrested anyone, never found the car or the man or whatever he'd been burying out there in the sand. It's like the whole thing never happened, except for the fact that it did, and I was there, and I saw it, and sometimes I can still hear that gunshot echoing across the desert. The worst part is knowing he's still out there. Whoever he was, whatever he was doing, he got away with it. He's probably done it again since then. Found another lonely stretch of highway, parked his car in the middle of the road, and gone back to his work with his little folding shovel and his rubber boots. Maybe he's more careful now. Maybe he doesn't leave the passenger door open anymore. Or maybe he wants someone to find him. Maybe that's the whole point. Leaving the car right there where anyone driving past can't miss it, seeing who's curious enough to stop and look, testing who's brave enough or stupid enough to check the trunk, seeing how close they'll get before he fires the warning shot. I don't drive that route anymore if I can help it. When dispatch offers me loads going through the Mojave, I try to pass them off to someone else, make up excuses about other commitments or maintenance needs or family shit. Most of the time they let me. Sometimes they don't and I have to take it. And on those nights I drive with both hands tight on the wheel and my eyes straight ahead, not looking at the sides of the road, not slowing down for anything. And if I ever see a red Fusion parked in the middle of the highway with its hazard lights blinking and its passenger door hanging open, I'm not stopping. I'll call it in from the next town, let the cops deal with it. But I'm not stopping. Once was enough. Once was more than enough. Some things you see out there on the road at night, you can laugh about later. Wrong turn that led to a weird town, strange hitchhiker, truck stop with a suspicious bathroom. Those are good stories, the kind of thing you tell over beers to make your buddies laugh. But some things aren't funny, and they never will be. Some things you carry with you for the rest of your life. And they sit in your chest like a weight and you can't ever quite put them down. This is one of those things. And I'll tell you right now, if you're driving through the Mojave late at night and you see a car that doesn't belong there, you keep driving. Don't stop. Don't be curious. Don't think you're going to help someone or figure out what happened. Just keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel and thank God it's not your problem. Because sometimes the things you find out there in the dark are things you really didn't want to know, and once you know them, you can't unknow them. They're with you forever, sitting in the back of your mind, waiting for those quiet moments at 3 in the morning when you're alone on an empty highway and the darkness feels like it's closing in. That's when you remember. That's when you see it all again in perfect clarity. The blinking hazard lights, and the open door, and those 3 black bags tied with rope in the trunk. That's when you hear the gunshot, and the voice yelling, "Hey!" and the horn blaring as the Fusion chases you down the highway. That's when you wonder what would have happened if you'd been just a little more curious, if you'd untied one of those bags and looked inside. And that's when you realize how lucky you were that you didn't. How lucky you were that he gave you a warning shot instead of something worse. How lucky you were to make it out of there at all. But you also realize that someone else might not be so lucky. Someone else might stop for that car and look in that trunk and get close enough that running doesn't help anymore. And you wonder if you should have tried harder to make the cops take it seriously, if you should have gone back yourself in the daylight to look around, if there was something more you could have done. Then you remember the look on his face and the rifle in his hand, and you know there was nothing else you could have done. You did the only thing that made sense, which was to get the hell out of there as fast as possible and never look back. You survived. That's what matters. I've been running these routes for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of strange shit out there on the highways late at night. Things that don't make sense. Situations that feel wrong. People who shouldn't be where they are. Most of the time, there's a reasonable explanation even if you never find out what it is. Car broke down. Someone got lost. A prank went wrong. Normal stuff, but every once in a while you run into something that's not normal at all. Something that's genuinely wrong in a way that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream at you to run. And when that happens, you listen to those instincts. You don't ask questions. You don't investigate. You just get out. That's the lesson I learned that night in the Mojave. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, and you don't want to be there when you find out exactly how wrong it is. You don't want to be the person who opens the garbage bags or asks too many questions or sticks around long enough to become part of whatever's happening. You just want to drive away and put as many miles as possible between you and that place. And you want to hope that the darkness swallows up whatever secrets are being buried out there in the sand. And you want to pray that you never have to think about it again. But you do think about it. All the time. Every time the road is empty, and the night is dark, and you're all alone out there with nothing but the rumble of your engine and the glow of your headlights cutting through the black. That's when it comes back to you, and you remember, and you wonder. And you keep driving, because that's all you can do. You keep driving, and you try not to think about what might be buried in the desert just off the side of the highway, and you try not to imagine what might be waiting for the next person who's curious enough to stop and look in the trunk of that red Fusion. Because somewhere out there, he's still driving that car, still parking it in the middle of empty highways at 4 a.m, still going back to his work with his shovel and his rifle and his rubber boots, still filling those garbage bags with whatever it is he doesn't want anyone to see. And someday, someone else is going to stop. Someone else is going to walk up to that car and look inside and reach for those bags and find out what's in them. And I just hope, when that happens, they're smart enough to run before it's too late. But I know they probably won't be. Because I wasn't smart enough, not at first. I was curious and I wanted to help, and I thought I could figure out what was going on. And I almost paid for that curiosity with my life. So when I drive through the Mojave now, I keep my eyes straight ahead, and I don't stop for anything. And I try not to think about the fact that somewhere out there in the darkness, there's a red car with its hazard lights blinking and its passenger door hanging open, waiting for the next person to come along. And I hope to God it's not you. Look, I know I'm young for this line of work. I'm 26 now, been driving for almost 3 years, and I still get guys at truck stops who look at me like I'm playing dress-up in my dad's rig. Truth is, I was supposed to be doing something completely different with my life. I had a full ride to a pretty good university, one of those schools where people's parents donate buildings, and everyone expects you to end up in a corner office somewhere. Engineering program. My folks were so proud when I got in, you should have seen them. My mom cried and my dad couldn't stop talking about it to everyone we knew. I made it through a 1.5 years before everything fell apart. I'm not going to get into all the details because they're personal and they're painful, and honestly they don't matter anymore. But let's just say some things happened that made it impossible for me to stay. family stuff, mental health stuff, the kind of complications that don't fit neatly into academic calendars and student support systems. One day I was taking thermodynamics and working on a senior design project, and the next day I was withdrawing from all my classes and moving back home and trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life. Everybody wanted to tell me I was throwing everything away. Professors, advisors, friends, family members, they all had opinions about what a waste it was, how I was better than this, how I could have been more. Like driving a truck is somehow less valid than sitting in an office. I don't know. Maybe they're right. Maybe I would have been happier doing engineering work somewhere. But that's not the path I'm on now, and there's no point dwelling on it. The money's decent. I'm my own boss most of the time, and I don't have to answer to anyone except my dispatcher and the DOT inspectors. The isolation is the hardest part. People don't tell you that when they talk about trucking. They talk about the long hours and the lifestyle and being away from home, but they don't mention what it's like to spend days at a time alone with your own thoughts and nothing but empty highway and AM radio static for company. If you've got demons, and I mean real psychological demons, not like monsters or whatever, they will come out to play when you're driving through the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. with no one to talk to and nowhere to go except forward. This thing I'm about to tell you happened about 3 months after I started. I was still new enough that I was trying to prove myself, taking every run they offered me, pushing myself to make good time, building up a reputation as someone reliable. I was doing a run from southern New Jersey up to Lafayette, Indiana. 12-hour drive, nothing too crazy, but I'd just finished an 8-hour haul, and I was already exhausted before I even started. The smart thing would have been to sleep for a few hours first, but I wanted to get both deliveries done as quickly as possible, get paid, move on to the next job. So I told dispatch I'd do it overnight. Leave around 9 p.m., arrive around 9 a.m., easy. I'd driven through worse conditions, I thought. I loaded up on Red Bull and gas station coffee and those little caffeine energy shots that probably aren't FDA approved, and figured I'd be fine. Young and stupid, that was me. The first part of the drive was okay. There was enough traffic that I had to pay attention, couldn't zone out too much. But once I got past Pennsylvania and into Ohio, the roads emptied out. It was just me and the occasional semi and a whole lot of darkness. The highway kind of hypnotizes you after a while, you know? The white lines coming at you endlessly, the rhythm of the road, the engine noise that becomes like white noise. Your mind starts to drift, and you're not really thinking about anything at all, just existing in this weird, half-conscious state. I was maybe halfway through when I realized I was out of Red Bull. I'd gone through my whole stash, 4 cans, and I didn't have anything else. I checked the center console probably 5 times like more would magically appear, but no, I was done. And I was starting to feel it too, that heaviness in my eyelids, the way your head starts to nod forward before you jerk it back up. Dangerous as hell. I've heard stories about guys who fell asleep at the wheel. What happens when you're doing 70 in a 40-ton vehicle, and you lose consciousness even for a second. I knew I had to stop. I hate stopping during runs, absolutely hate it. Because the minute you stop moving, you feel how tired you really are, and it's 10 times harder to get going again. But I didn't have a choice. I needed caffeine, or I needed sleep, and I didn't have time for sleep, so caffeine it was. I saw a sign for a service area coming up, and I figured I'd pull in there, grab something from a vending machine, maybe use the bathroom. 5 minutes tops, and then back on the road. But when I actually took the exit and pulled into the place, I realized my mistake. It wasn't a service area. Not a real one, anyway. It was one of those old, abandoned gas stations that you see sometimes. The kind that used to be a truck stop or a rest area back before the interstate got reroaded or the business went under. There were a couple of buildings, Parking spaces with weeds growing through the cracks in the asphalt. Everything dark and shut down. I should have kept going. There was probably another place 5 or 10 miles up the road. But I'm an idiot, and I was tired, and I thought maybe there'd be a working vending machine or something salvageable. So I parked the truck and sat there for a minute looking at the place. There was a main building that looked like it used to be a convenience store, and next to it a smaller structure that might have been a garage or a bathroom facility. No lights anywhere. No other vehicles. The whole place had that abandoned feel, like no one had been there in years. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The air was cold, that damp kind of cold you get in Ohio in early spring, and it smelled like old asphalt and diesel and something organic and rotting that I couldn't quite identify. I walked toward the main building, my boots loud on the pavement, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The door to the convenience store was unlocked. That should have been my first warning sign right there, but I was too tired to think clearly. I pulled it open and it swung inward with a creak, and I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around. The place was gutted. Empty shelves, trash on the floor, graffiti on the walls. No vending machines, no coolers, nothing. Just a hollow shell of a building that used to serve a purpose and didn't anymore. I was about to leave when I saw a faint glow coming from somewhere in the back. A doorway led to what I assumed was a back room, or maybe an employee area, and there was definitely light coming from there. Orange light, like maybe from a space heater or a camping lantern. My curiosity got the better of me. Maybe someone was squatting here, I thought. Maybe they'd have something to drink, or at least I could ask if there was a working station nearby. I walked toward the back room, called out, "Hello?" but didn't get a response. The light got brighter as I approached, and when I pushed open the door, I saw that the glow was coming from a refrigerator. An old commercial fridge plugged into an outlet, the interior light on even though the door was closed. It was the only thing in the room. Everything else had been stripped out, but someone had left this fridge behind, still running, still consuming electricity from whatever circuit it was connected to. I walked over and opened it. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some abandoned food or drinks, maybe nothing. What I found was that the entire interior had been removed. No shelves, no drawers, no racks, just an empty box with a light bulb at the top. Completely hollow. Weird, but okay, whatever. I closed the fridge and turned to leave. That's when I heard the sound. A clatter, like something metallic hitting the floor, coming from the main room. I froze. I'd been alone in here, I was sure of it. I'd looked around when I came in. There was nowhere for someone to hide. But I'd definitely heard something. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, listening. Heart starting to beat faster. Nothing, no more sounds. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, or that something had fallen on its own. An unstable piece of trash or debris finally giving way. I walked back into the main room, slower this time, shining my flashlight into all the corners. The room was empty, same as when I'd entered. I did a full sweep with the flashlight, checked behind the checkout counter, looked for any signs of disturbance. Nothing. But something felt wrong now. The air felt different. The quality of the silence had changed in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't just empty anymore. It felt watched. I got out of there fast. Walked back to the truck, trying not to look like I was hurrying, trying not to let my imagination run away with me. But by the time I reached the cab, I was definitely moving quicker than normal. I climbed up, locked the doors behind me, and sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel, just breathing and telling myself I was being ridiculous. The problem was I still needed caffeine, and I was still exhausted. I looked at the GPS, and there was another stop about 6 miles ahead. This one marked as open 24 hours. Perfect. I'd go there, get what I needed, and forget about this weird abandoned place. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, glancing at the convenience store in my mirrors as I left. The building was dark and lifeless, just like it had been when I arrived. I merged back onto the highway and drove to the next stop, which turned out to be a proper truck stop with bright lights and other vehicles and everything looking normal and safe. I parked, went inside, bought 3 Red Bulls, and a couple of those disgusting pressed sandwiches they keep in the refrigerated section, used the bathroom, and got back in the truck. I cracked open the first Red Bull and downed half of it in one go, feeling the caffeine start to work its way into my system. The clock on the dashboard said it was just past 3 in the morning. Still had about 6 hours to go. I put the truck in gear and headed back out onto the highway, already feeling more alert. The weirdness of that abandoned station fading into just another strange thing that happens when you're overtired and alone. I'd been driving for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed the curtain behind my seat was moving. Just slightly, like there was air current back there, even though I didn't have any windows open and the climate control was off. I watched it in the rearview mirror for a few seconds, telling myself it was nothing, just the natural movement of fabric from the truck's motion. But it kept moving in a way that didn't match the vehicle's rhythm, almost like it was billowing, like something was disturbing it from behind. My mouth went dry. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was hyper-aware of that curtain now, watching it in the peripheral vision of the rear view. It moved again, more noticeably this time, like something had brushed against it or pushed it from the back. The sleeping area of my truck isn't huge, but it's big enough for someone to hide in if they really wanted to. Behind the curtain, behind the seat, in the storage compartments. If someone had gotten in while I was parked at that abandoned station, while I was inside the building, they could have climbed into the back and I never would have known. I felt sweat start to bead on my forehead even though the cab was cool. I couldn't turn around and look. Not while I was driving. Not safely. And if there was someone back there, what would I even do? Pull over? Confront them? What if they had a weapon? What if there was more than one person? I pulled out my phone as casually as I could, like I was just checking for messages, and pulled up the GPS. Found the nearest police station. 23 minutes away, I could do 23 minutes. I merged into the right lane, trying to keep my speed reasonable so I wouldn't attract attention from any cops who might be patrolling, but fast enough that I wouldn't spend any more time than necessary alone in this truck with whatever might be behind me. The curtain moved again. I was sure of it this time, absolutely positive. A definite movement, unmistakable. Something was back there. Someone was back there, in my truck, breathing the same air as me, maybe watching me right now through a gap in the curtain, waiting for the right moment to do whatever they were planning to do. I've never been so scared in my life. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was playing through my head. Every news story about truckers getting carjacked or murdered or robbed. I kept the phone in my lap with the map to the police station on the screen, tracking the miles as they slowly counted down. 21 minutes, 19 minutes, 17. The worst part was not knowing, not being able to confirm what I suspected. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it really was just the curtain moving on its own, my tired brain interpreting normal truck vibrations as something sinister. But maybe I was right, and there was someone back there. Someone who had been hiding in that abandoned building, who had watched me walk in and check the fridge and heard me leave. Who had run out to my truck while I was still inside and climbed into the back and settled in to wait. Why? What did they want? Were they just looking for a ride? Were they planning to rob me? Were they waiting for me to stop somewhere isolated so they could do something worse? All these thoughts cascading through my head, each one worse than the last. And I couldn't do anything except keep driving and watch the GPS countdown and try not to let whoever was back there know that I knew they were there. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to take my hands off the wheel, and I didn't want whoever was behind the curtain to hear me talking to dispatch. So I just drove, white-knuckling it, checking the mirror constantly to see if the curtain moved again. It didn't, or maybe it did, and I just couldn't tell anymore because I was so amped up on adrenaline and fear that I was seeing movement everywhere. 14 minutes. 12 minutes, 10. I started seeing signs for the town where the police station was located. Small place. Looked like maybe 5,000 people, the kind of town that exists primarily as a highway exit. I took the ramp probably faster than I should have, the whole rig tilting a bit as I made the turn, and followed the GPS directions through quiet residential streets toward the station. It was a small building, brick, single story, with 2 police cruisers parked out front. I pulled into the parking lot and got as close to the front entrance as I could physically get with the truck, pulled the parking brake and sat there for a second with my hand on the door handle. If I got out, whoever was back there might try to run, or they might come at me. Or they might do nothing and I'd feel like an idiot for freaking out over a moving curtain. I didn't care. I opened the door, jumped down, and ran to the station entrance without looking back. There was a buzzer by the door, and I pressed it repeatedly until a tired-looking officer in his 50s opened up. "Help you?" he said, looking me up and down, probably trying to figure out if I was drunk or high or what. "There's someone in my truck," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I think there's someone hiding in the back." I was at this abandoned station and I went inside, and when I came back and started driving, the curtain was moving and I think someone got in while I was parked, and they're still in there now. The officer's expression changed immediately from annoyed to alert. He called for backup on his radio, and in less than a minute there were 3 cops total, all of them heading out to my truck with hands on their weapons. I stayed by the door, watching, as they approached the cab. One of them called out, identifying themselves as police, ordering anyone inside to come out with their hands visible. Nothing happened. One of the cops climbed up and opened the driver's door, shining a flashlight inside. He looked around for a moment, then said something to the other officers I couldn't hear. Then he reached forward and pulled back the curtain. I held my breath. He pulled out a person, a man, dirty, wearing layers of ragged clothing. Then another person, a woman, equally dirty. Then a third person, another man. 3 of them total, all of them looking homeless or close to it. All of them emerging from my truck like clowns from a tiny car. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 3 people had been hiding back there. 3. While I was driving, within arm's reach of me, the police cuffed all 3 of them and sat them on the ground by the truck. One of the cops came over to me and asked me to walk him through exactly what had happened. I told him everything, about the abandoned station, about going inside, about parking in the lot. He nodded and made notes and then went to search the back of the truck more thoroughly. When he came back, he looked grim. "They had weapons," he said. "Nothing firearms but knives. 2 of them, switchblades." I felt like I was going to be sick. Knives, they'd had knives. While I was driving, while I was alone on the highway with them in the back of my truck, they were sitting there with knives deciding what to do with me. The 3 people wouldn't talk. The police tried asking them questions, where they were from, what they were planning to do, but they just stared. Not at the ground, not at the police, at me. All 3 of them, these hollow-eyed, blank-faced people in dirty clothes, just staring at me with expressions I couldn't read. Not angry, not scared, not apologetic. Just staring. One of the officers came over and suggested I might want to wait inside while they processed everything. I agreed immediately. I didn't want to be anywhere near those people. I sat in the station's small waiting area, drinking terrible coffee from a machine, trying to process what had just happened. A younger officer, maybe late 20s, came and sat with me after a while. She was nice, asked me if I was okay, offered to call someone for me. I said I was fine even though I wasn't. We talked for a bit, and she explained that they'd been having problems with squatters in some of the abandoned buildings along the highway. Transients looking for warm places to sleep or hide out. Most of them were harmless, she said, but every once in a while you'd get ones who were dangerous or desperate or both. You're lucky you noticed the curtain, she said. Lot of drivers wouldn't have. They probably would have waited until you stopped at another isolated location and then robbed you. Or worse. Worse. She didn't elaborate on what worse meant, and I didn't ask. I could imagine plenty of scenarios on my own, thanks. They kept the 3 people in custody. Trespassing charges, possibly burglary, illegal weapons possession. They asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I said yes to everything. I wanted those people as far from me as possible for as long as possible. The detective who took my statement said they'd investigate the abandoned station too, see if there were any other squatters, check if the 3 they'd caught had been involved in any other incidents. They cleared my truck and said I was free to go. I climbed back into the cab, but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine right away. I just sat there looking at the curtain, knowing that 3 people had been behind it, that they'd been there for probably 20 minutes while I drove, that they'd been so close I could have reached back and touched them. The youngest officer offered to follow me to the next truck stop so I wouldn't be alone. I took her up on it. She drove behind me for about 15 miles until we reached a major station with lots of other trucks and bright lights and people around. I thanked her, and she told me to be safe and to maybe consider getting some kind of security system for the truck, and then she headed back to the station. I parked, and I sat there in the cab for over an hour, maybe 2, just trying to calm down enough to think straight. The sun was starting to come up. I was still exhausted, but there was no way I could sleep now. Not here, not in this truck, not with the memory of those 3 faces staring at me. Eventually, I gave up on the idea of sleeping and just started driving again. I finished the delivery to Lafayette running on pure adrenaline and fear and whatever residual caffeine was left in my system. When I got back to my home base, I told everyone what had happened. Some of the older drivers had similar stories. Times they'd found people hiding in their trailers or noticed someone had tried to break into the cab. It's more common than you'd think. All these abandoned places along the highways. All these desperate people with nowhere to go. All these trucks left unattended at rest stops and service areas. It's a perfect combination for exactly this kind of thing. I started taking precautions after that. I check the back of the truck obsessively now before I start driving. I lock the doors even when I'm just stepping away for a minute. I never park in isolated places if I can help it. I invested in some security cameras for the exterior, and I installed a partition between the cab and the sleeper area so no one can reach through and grab me while I'm driving. But mostly I just don't stop at abandoned places anymore. Period. It doesn't matter how tired I am or what I need, I will drive until I find somewhere with lights and people and security. Because I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm not interested in learning it again. The thing that bothers me most, that keeps me up at night sometimes, is that I still don't know what they were planning to do. Were they going to wait until I stopped somewhere and then rob me? Were they going to try something while I was driving? Were they just looking for a ride and the knives were for self-defense? I don't know. No. I'll never know. And that uncertainty is almost worse than knowing would be. Sometimes I think about that abandoned station and wonder if they're still using it as a base. If they grab riders from truckers who stop there not knowing any better. Sometimes I think about calling the police department and asking what happened to those 3 people, if they got convicted, if they're in jail or back out on the streets. But I never do. I don't really want to know. What I do know is that I got lucky. If I hadn't noticed that curtain moving, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, If I'd stopped at another isolated rest area instead of driving straight to a police station, things could have gone very differently. I might not be here to tell this story. So, if you're driving, especially at night, especially alone, be careful where you stop. Check your surroundings. Lock your doors. Trust your gut when something feels wrong. Because sometimes the things you're afraid of aren't just in your imagination. Sometimes they're real, and they're closer than you think, and they're waiting for you to let your guard down. I still drive the same routes, still make the overnight deliveries, still spend hours alone on empty highways in the dark. But I'm more careful now. More paranoid maybe, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in this line of work. Paranoia keeps you alert. It keeps you checking your mirrors. It keeps you alive. And every single time I park somewhere, anywhere, even for just a minute, I check the back of the truck before I start driving again. Every single time. Because I know now what can happen if you don't. I know what it's like to realize too late that you're not alone. That someone has been there with you the whole time, watching and waiting, and you never even knew until it was almost too late. That's the thing about driving at night. You're never really sure if you're alone or not. The darkness hides too many things. And sometimes the darkness is hiding something that wants to hurt you. Something that's patient enough to wait for the right moment. Something that's desperate enough to try. I drove past that abandoned station once, about a year after it happened. I didn't stop, obviously, but I slowed down enough to look. The buildings were still there, still dark, still abandoned. There was trash in the parking lot and more weeds growing through the cracks. It looked harmless in the daylight. Just another failed business, another casualty of changing highway routes and shifting commerce. You'd never know it was a place where people hid in the shadows waiting for someone like me to stop by. But I know, and now you know too. So next time you're driving through somewhere late at night and you need to pull over, think twice about where you're stopping. Think about who might be watching. Think about how easy it would be for someone to slip into your vehicle while you're not looking, to hide somewhere you won't notice until it's too late. And if you ever see a curtain move in your rearview mirror, if you ever feel like you're not alone even though you should be, don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid or imagining things. Drive straight to the nearest police station and let them check. Because sometimes your instincts are right. Sometimes that feeling of being watched is real. Sometimes the monster isn't under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes it's in the back of your truck, behind a curtain, with a knife, waiting to see what you'll do next. I think about those three faces sometimes. The way they stared at me with those blank expressions. I wonder what they were thinking. I wonder if they regret trying it, or if they just see it as bad luck that I noticed them. I wonder if they're still out there somewhere, finding new places to hide, new trucks to climb into, new drivers to terrorize. Mostly, though, I just try not to think about it at all. I focus on the road and the deliveries and getting from point A to point B safely. That's all I can control. Everything else is just noise and fear and speculation, and dwelling on it doesn't help anything. But late at night, when I'm alone on the highway and everything is dark and quiet, sometimes I glance in the rearview mirror at that curtain behind my seat. And even though I checked it before I started driving, even though I know for sure that I'm alone back there, sometimes I swear I see it move, just slightly, just enough to make me wonder. And that's when I remember that night, and those three people, and those knives, and how close I came to being just another story that other drivers tell at truck stops. Another cautionary tale, another reason to be careful. I got lucky, I know that, not everyone does. My father was the most religious man I ever knew. Not in an obnoxious way where he'd preach at you or try to convert everyone he met, but in a quiet, steady way that shaped everything he did. He drove trucks for 40 years before his heart gave out on him, and he always said God rode in the passenger seat with him on every haul. He wore a silver cross around his neck that his own father had given him, and before every trip he'd touch it once and say a quick prayer under his breath. When I started driving myself, about 15 years ago now, he gave me that cross. Told me it had kept him safe for 4 decades and he hoped it would do the same for me. I wear it every day. I touch it before I start the engine, same as he did. I'm not as religious as he was, to be honest, but there's something comforting about the ritual, about feeling that weight against my chest, and knowing he wore it the same way on the same roads I'm driving now. It makes me feel less alone out here. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse operation based out of Fargo, North Dakota. If you've never been to North Dakota, I can tell you it's flat. Painfully, incredibly flat. You can see for miles in every direction, and it's just fields and sky and nothing else. Some people find it peaceful, but I always thought it was a little unsettling. All that emptiness. Makes you feel small. Makes you feel like if you disappeared out here, no one would notice for a long time. The company I was with paid by the load, not by the hour. So, efficiency was everything. The faster you could complete a run, the more runs you could do, the more money you made. Simple math. This incentivized some guys to push themselves way too hard, skip sleep, drive faster than they should, take risks that weren't worth taking. I'll admit I fell into that trap sometimes. When you're trying to make a living and support yourself and maybe send some money back to help your mom after your dad passes, you do what you have to do. This particular run was early May, a Tuesday morning, though it was so early it was basically still Monday night. I'd picked up a load that needed to get to Montana by the next day, and I'd calculated that if I drove straight through without stopping for sleep, I could make it with time to spare. I'd done longer hauls before. I figured I could handle it. I left Fargo around 2 in the afternoon and drove through the evening and into the night. The route took me west on Highway 94, straight across North Dakota and into Montana. 8 hours, maybe 9 if I hit any weather. The forecast was clear, so I wasn't worried. I had my coffee, my energy drinks, my audiobooks to keep me awake, and that silver cross around my neck. What could go wrong? Everything was fine for the first 6 hours or so. I made good time, the roads were empty, I was feeling alert and focused. But around 9 p.m., the fatigue started creeping in. That heavy feeling behind your eyes, that sense that your body is shutting down whether you want it to or not. I was fighting it, slapping my face, blasting the AC, doing everything I could to stay awake. I'd gone too far to turn back now. Montana wasn't that much further. One thing my buddy Tristan had turned me on to when I first started was smelling salts. Little glass capsules filled with ammonia or something similar. I don't know the exact chemistry. You crack one open and take a whiff and it's like an electrical shock to your system. Burns your nose like hell, but it wakes you up instantly. Tristan had warned me not to use them too much. Said they could be dangerous if you did them back to back. But in an emergency they worked better than anything else. I reached for the container I kept in my center console and pulled out a capsule, cracked it under my nose, and inhaled. The effect was immediate. My head snapped back, my eyes watered, and I felt a surge of alertness that cut through the fog of exhaustion like a blade. It would last maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour if I was lucky. Long enough to get to the next rest stop at least. Except there were no rest stops. Not out here. Highway 94 through eastern Montana is about as isolated as you can get. There's nothing, no towns, no gas stations, no places to pull over except the shoulder. Just road and fields and darkness. I kept driving, hoping I'd see signs for somewhere to stop, but there was nothing. The smelling salts wore off faster than I expected. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd built up a tolerance. Whatever the reason, after about 20 minutes I could feel myself starting to fade again. My eyelids were heavy. My thoughts were getting fuzzy. I knew I was in trouble. Then the truck started to drift. I was driving down the center of my lane, and then suddenly I wasn't. I was crossing over onto the shoulder, and the rumble strips were making that horrible vibrating sound they're designed to make to wake up drowsy drivers. I jerked the wheel back, overcorrected slightly, and felt my heart rate spike as adrenaline dumped into my system. That was close. Too close. I had to stop. I couldn't keep driving like this. I was going to crash or kill someone or both. I slowed way down, looking for anywhere I could safely pull off. The problem was visibility was shit. My headlights were okay, but they only reached so far, and beyond that it was just pure blackness. No moon that night, or if there was one, it was behind clouds. I couldn't see anything except what was directly in front of me. That's when I saw the dress. Purple fabric in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. I almost didn't register what it was at first. My brain was so tired it took a second to process. A dress. A woman's dress lying right on the center line like someone had dropped it there. I slowed down even more, staring at it as I approached. What the hell was a dress doing out here? I drove past it slowly, watching it in my mirrors until it disappeared into the darkness behind me. Weird, I thought, but I was too exhausted to think about it much beyond that. Maybe 200 yards up the road I saw something else. Shoes. A pair of women's shoes, sitting in the road side by side like someone had taken them off and just left them there. I rolled past those too, frowning now, starting to feel uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain. Then there was more. More clothing, scattered along the road at irregular intervals. A shirt, pants, more shoes. Some of the items looked small, like children's clothing. A tiny jacket, small sneakers. I'd slowed to maybe 20 miles an hour now, my exhaustion forgotten as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. Why was there clothing all over the highway in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night? My first thought was an accident. Maybe a vehicle had hit something and clothes had spilled out, but there was no wreckage, no broken glass, no skid marks. The clothes were just there, placed or dropped or scattered, and I had no idea why. I should have kept driving. I should have gotten to the next town and called the police and let them handle it. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the children's clothing. Maybe it was the thought that someone might be hurt and need help. Maybe I was just too tired to make good decisions. Whatever the reason, I pulled the truck over onto the shoulder and put it in park. I sat there for a minute with the engine idling, looking at the last pile of clothing I'd passed. It was maybe 50 feet behind me now, barely visible in the red glow of my taillights. The smart thing would be to stay in the truck and call for help, but my phone had no signal out here. I'd have to drive until I found service, and by then, whoever left these clothes might be long gone or worse. I touched the cross around my neck, that silver cross my father had worn for 40 years. I said a quick prayer, same kind my dad used to say. Then I grabbed my flashlight, climbed down from the cab, and walked back toward the clothing. The night air was cool and completely still. No wind at all. It was the kind of stillness that feels oppressive, like the atmosphere itself is pressing down on you. The only sounds were my boots on the asphalt and the distant hum of my truck's engine. I swept the flashlight beam around as I walked, checking the ditches on either side of the road, looking for any sign of a person or a vehicle or anything that would explain this. Nothing. Just empty fields on both sides, grass and darkness extending out into nowhere. I reached the pile of clothing and crouched down to look at it. Definitely children's clothes. A small shirt with cartoon characters on it, tiny jeans, little canvas shoes. My stomach tightened. Kids' clothes on a deserted highway in the middle of the night was not a good sign. This could mean a lot of things, and none of them were good. I stood up and turned slowly in a circle, shining my flashlight out into the fields. The beam didn't reach very far, maybe 30 or 40 feet before it just dissolved into the black. Anyone could be out there and I wouldn't see them. That's when I heard it. A crunch, like someone stepping on dead grass or breaking a stick. It came from the left side of the road, from somewhere out in the field. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything. Just grass and darkness. I stood there frozen, listening. My heart was pounding now. I wanted to call out, to ask if someone was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct telling me to stay quiet. 30 seconds of silence. Then another crunch, but this time from the right side of the road. The opposite direction from the first sound. I spun around, trying to find the source, but again there was nothing. Just darkness. Someone was out there. Multiple someones by the sound of it. Moving around in the fields on both sides of the road. And they were doing it quietly, carefully, like they didn't want me to know exactly where they were. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the truck and leave. Right now. Don't ask questions, don't investigate further, just go. I started walking back toward the cab. Not running, but moving quickly, keeping the flashlight sweeping back and forth to make sure no one was coming up behind me. I was maybe 10 feet from the truck when I heard the scream. A child's scream. High-pitched and terrified, coming from somewhere in the woods on the left side of the road. It cut through the silence like a knife, and I stopped dead, every muscle in my body tensing. A kid. There was a kid out there in the dark, screaming. All thoughts of danger vanished and I turned toward the sound, trying to pinpoint where it had come from. I couldn't just leave if there was a child in trouble. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to a kid because I was too scared to help. I was about to head toward the woods when the scream came again. And this time something about it sounded wrong. Off. It was the exact same scream as before, same pitch, same duration, same everything. Like it was a recording being played twice. I froze again, confused now. What the hell? Before I could process what that meant, I heard an engine roar to life somewhere behind me. I spun around and my headlights caught movement, someone or something ducking behind the truck. At the same time, I heard running footsteps, multiple sets, coming from different directions. I didn't think. Pure panic took over, and I ran for the cab, yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I hit the lock button and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I almost couldn't get the key to turn. The truck shuddered to life and I threw it into gear, ready to floor it and get out of there. That's when I saw them. I'd turned the truck slightly when I parked, and now the headlights were pointing at an angle into the woods on the left side of the road. And in that cone of light, maybe 30 yards in, I could see people. 3 or 4 of them, I couldn't tell exactly because they were ducking behind trees as soon as the light hit them. But I saw enough to see what they were holding. A speaker. One of them had a large, portable speaker, the kind you use for outdoor parties or events. And in that split second before they hid, I saw one of them reaching for it, probably to trigger that child's scream again. They were trying to lure me into the woods. The clothing on the road, the sounds in the field, the screaming child, it was all fake. All a setup to get me to come closer, to walk into those trees where they were waiting. For what? To rob me? To hurt me? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. I punched the accelerator and the truck lurched forward. As I straightened out onto the highway, I saw someone standing on the shoulder on the right side of the road. A dark figure silhouetted in my headlights. They shouted something I couldn't make out and then threw something at the truck. Whatever it was hit the passenger window hard enough to crack the glass, but not break it. Then I was past them and accelerating, leaving them and their trap behind. I drove like hell for the next hour, pushing the truck as fast as I dared, not slowing down for anything, not stopping to check the damage to the window or call the police or anything else. I just drove, hands locked on the wheel, checking my mirrors constantly to make sure no one was following me. The adrenaline had burned away all my exhaustion, and I was wide awake now, almost painfully alert. When I finally reached the warehouse in Montana I was supposed to deliver to, I pulled in and just sat in the cab for a long time, breathing, trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking. I couldn't stop replaying what had happened in my mind. Those people in the woods, that speaker, that fake scream. How close I'd come to walking into whatever trap they'd set. After I unloaded, I slept for 10 hours straight in a truck stop parking lot with the doors locked and the curtains drawn. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the Montana Highway Patrol and report what had happened. I gave them the approximate location, described what I'd seen, told them about the clothing and the people in the speaker. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to investigate and call me back with any updates. They called me back 3 days later. They'd found the location based on my description, had searched the area, but there was nothing there. No clothing, no people, no evidence that anything unusual had occurred. They asked me some pointed questions about whether I'd been drinking or using drugs, whether I was sure about what I'd seen. I got the impression they thought I'd imagined the whole thing, or made it up for some reason. I stopped arguing with them after a while. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had happened. Whether they believed me or not didn't change the reality of that night. To this day, I don't know what those people were planning. The best case scenario is they were trying to rob me. Figured a lone trucker would be an easy mark, and they'd set up this elaborate trap to get me out of my vehicle and vulnerable. Maybe they'd done it before to other drivers. Maybe I wasn't the first person to see that trail of clothing on the road. The worst case scenario, the one I try not to think about, is that they wanted more than just my wallet. That they were looking for something else, something darker. That if I'd walked into those woods after that fake child's scream, I never would have walked out. I don't drive that route anymore. I tell dispatch I'm not available when they have loads going through eastern Montana. I'll take longer routes, less profitable runs, whatever I have to do to avoid that stretch of Highway 94. Some of the other drivers think I'm being superstitious or paranoid, but I don't care. I know what's out there in those woods, and I'm not going back. The thing that haunts me most is the children's clothing. Where did they get it? Why children's clothing specifically? Did they know that would be more likely to make someone stop and investigate? Or was there something more sinister going on, something I don't want to think about? I asked around at truck stops after it happened, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced something similar. Most guys just looked at me like I was crazy. But one old-timer, a guy who'd been driving for 30 years, told me he'd heard stories about that area. People setting up ambushes for truckers, using all kinds of tricks to get them to stop. Fake hitchhikers, fake accidents, fake distress signals. He said the smart move was to never stop for anything on that particular stretch of road, no matter how legitimate it seemed. I wish I'd talked to him before I made that run. Might have saved me some trauma. My father used to say that God protected him on the road, that the cross around his neck kept him safe from harm. I don't know if I believe in that kind of direct divine intervention, but I will say this. Something made me stop before I got to those woods. Something made me hesitate when I heard that scream, made me notice that it sounded exactly the same the second time. Something gave me the presence of mind to run back to the truck instead of charging into the trees to help. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was my father watching out for me somehow. Maybe it was just luck or instinct or common sense finally kicking in through my exhaustion. I don't know. But whatever it was, I'm grateful for it. I still touch that silver cross before I start every drive. I still say a quick prayer like my dad taught me. And now, when I do it, I'm not just praying for safety from accidents or mechanical failures or bad weather. I'm praying for protection from the people out there in the dark places, the ones who set traps and wait for someone desperate or tired or stupid enough to fall into them. Because I learned that night that the scariest things on the road aren't always the ones you can see coming. Sometimes the danger looks like someone who needs help. Sometimes it sounds like a child crying. Sometimes it's disguised as something that triggers your good instincts, your desire to be a decent person and help someone in trouble. And sometimes, the right thing to do is ignore those instincts and drive away. Because not everyone who looks like they need help actually needs it. And not every cry for help is genuine. I think about those people a lot. I wonder if they're still out there on that stretch of highway, still scattering clothes on the road, still playing that recording of a child screaming, still waiting for someone to take the bait. I wonder how many people have stopped before me and what happened to them. I wonder if any of them walked into those woods and never came out. Mostly, I wonder why. What drives someone to do something like that? What kind of person sets up an elaborate trap in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night and waits for hours in the cold and dark just for the chance to hurt someone? I can't wrap my head around it. I don't want to understand that kind of mindset. But I know those people exist. I've seen them. And that knowledge has changed how I drive, how I think about the road, how I evaluate situations when I'm out there alone. I'm more cautious now. More paranoid, more willing to keep driving even when something seems wrong and someone might need help. Some people might say that's sad, that those people won, that they succeeded in making me less trusting, less willing to help. Maybe that's true, but I'm alive to have this conversation, and that's worth something. I still drive at night, still take the long hauls, still spend hours alone on empty highways in the dark. But I'm smarter about it now. I plan my routes more carefully, avoid isolated areas when I can, keep my phone charged and my doors locked and my eyes open. And if I ever see clothing scattered on the road in the middle of the night, I'm not stopping. I'm calling it in from the next town and letting the authorities handle it. Because I've learned that sometimes the things that look most like they need your help are actually the things that want to hurt you most. That's the lesson I took from that night in Montana. Trust your instincts, yes, but also trust your fear. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. When your gut tells you to run, listen to it. Don't be a hero. Don't think you're going to save someone. Just get out. I touch that cross around my neck, and I think about my father and all the years he drove these roads safely. And I hope he's right that God rides in the passenger seat, because out here in the dark, on these empty highways in the middle of nowhere, you need all the protection you can get. The woods are full of things that want to hurt you, and some of those things learned a long time ago that the best way to catch someone is to make them think they're helping. So they put on a disguise, they set a trap, they make themselves look helpless or desperate or in need of rescue, and then they wait, in the dark, in the cold, in the woods on the side of the highway. They wait for someone like me, someone tired enough or decent enough or stupid enough to stop. I almost was that person. I came within seconds of being that person. And if I had been, I don't think I'd be here telling this story. I think I'd be somewhere in those woods, in a shallow grave or scattered in pieces. Another trucker who disappeared on a lonely highway in the middle of the night. But I'm not. I'm here, and that silver cross is still around my neck, and I'm still driving, and I'm still alive. And every time I start the engine and touch that cross and say that prayer, I thank whatever divine providence or dumb luck or paternal protection kept me from walking into those woods, because I know what's out there now. I know what's waiting in the darkness, and I'm never, ever going back to find out what would have happened if I'd been just a little bit less careful, a little bit more trusting, a little bit more willing to be a hero. The woods can keep their secrets. I don't need to know them, I just need to keep driving. I want to tell you about the rest stop on I-80 westbound, mile marker 412, somewhere in the middle of Nebraska where there's nothing for 100 miles in either direction except cornfields and the occasional grain silo breaking up the horizon. I've driven past it maybe 300 times in the last decade, and I've never stopped there during the day, only ever at night when I absolutely had to, and after what happened last month I'm never stopping there again. Day or night, full bladder or empty tank or whatever emergency I think I might have. I'll piss in a bottle before I pull into that parking lot again. The thing about being a night shift trucker is you develop certain habits, certain routines that keep you sane when you're alone for 12 or 15 hours at a stretch with nothing but your own thoughts and the sound of tires on asphalt. You learn which rest stops are clean and which ones smell like something died in the bathroom 3 weeks ago. You learn which vending machines actually work and which ones will eat your money and give you nothing. You learn which parking spots have the best lighting and which ones sit in shadows where anyone could walk up to your truck without you seeing them coming. You develop a mental map of the highways that's more detailed than any GPS because it's based on experience, on thousands of hours spent driving the same routes over and over until you could do it in your sleep. That rest stop at mile marker 412 has always been on my mental list as acceptable but not ideal. It's small, just a bathroom facility and a couple vending machines, maybe 8 parking spaces for trucks and another dozen for cars. There's a picnic area with some tables that I've never seen anyone use, and a dog walking area that's just a patch of grass with a trash can for the poop bags. The bathrooms are usually relatively clean. The lights work most of the time. And it's positioned at a useful point on the route where you've been driving long enough to need a break, but you're not so close to civilization that you can just push through to a proper truck stop. The weird thing about it, the thing I never really thought about until last month, is that I've never seen another person there. Not once. Not in 10 years of stopping there maybe 20 or 30 times, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. I've seen other trucks parked, sure, and cars, but I've never actually encountered another human being. No one in the bathroom when I go in, no one at the vending machines, no one walking their dog or sitting at the picnic tables. The vehicles are there, but the people aren't. Like, everyone arrives and then immediately vanishes into some dimension I can't access. I used to think I was just timing it right, hitting those windows when everyone was either in their vehicles sleeping or had already finished their business and left. But now, I think there was something else going on. Something I should have paid attention to years ago, but I was too focused on my route and my schedule and my own fatigue to really process. Last month I was running a load from Chicago to Salt Lake City. Appliances again. Seems like half my jobs are appliances. I'd left around 8 p.m., figuring I'd drive through the night and arrive mid-morning, unload, grab a hotel room and sleep until evening, then head back. Standard run, nothing unusual. The weather was clear, traffic was light, I was making good time. Around 2:30 in the morning, I was somewhere in Nebraska, that long flat stretch where the highway cuts through an ocean of darkness and agricultural land. I'd been driving for about 6 hours at that point, and I needed to piss like you wouldn't believe. I'd had 3 cups of coffee and 2 energy drinks trying to stay alert, and all that liquid was making its presence known. I could have held it, probably, pushed through to the next major stop about an hour ahead, but I was uncomfortable, and I knew that discomfort would make it harder to concentrate, and I didn't want to risk an accident just because I was too stubborn to take a 5-minute break. So when I saw the sign for the rest area at mile marker 412, I signaled and took the exit. The off-ramp curved away from the highway and down into a little valley, and as I descended I could see the rest stop below, its lights creating a small island of illumination in the surrounding darkness. There were 3 other trucks already parked and 2 cars, which seemed like a lot for this particular stop at this particular time, but I didn't think much of it. Just meant other drivers had the same idea as me. I pulled into a parking spot at the far end of the truck section, away from the other vehicles, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment in the sudden silence. You don't realize how loud the engine is until you turn it off, and then the absence of that sound is almost physical. I could hear my own breathing, the tick of the cooling engine. Nothing else. Through the windshield, I could see the bathroom facility about 50 yards away. A squat, concrete building with harsh fluorescent lights visible through the small windows near the roofline. The lights were flickering slightly, that irregular stuttering you get with old ballasts that need replacing. I climbed down from the cab and stretched, feeling my spine pop in several places. The air was cool and still. That particular quality of stillness you only get in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. No wind, no ambient noise, just silence pressing in from all sides. I could smell diesel and asphalt and something organic, maybe fertilizer from the surrounding fields. I walked toward the bathroom building, my boots loud on the pavement, each step echoing in that weird way sounds do when there's nothing around to absorb them. The concrete felt solid under my feet, but the air felt thin somehow, insubstantial, like I was walking through something that wasn't quite real. I noticed as I got closer that the lights inside the building were flickering more noticeably than they'd seemed from the truck, and with each flicker I could see shadows moving inside, even though I was pretty sure the place was empty. Had to be empty. Nobody else was walking around, no other vehicles had their lights on. No sounds of doors opening or closing or engines starting. Just me and my footsteps, and that flickering light. The building itself looked older up close than it had from a distance. The concrete walls were stained with years of exposure to weather and exhaust fumes, and there were cracks running through the structure in spiderweb patterns that made me wonder about its structural integrity. The paint around the door frames was peeling, revealing multiple layers of different colors underneath, like the place had been repainted a dozen times over the decades, and each coat was giving up and falling away. There were 2 entrances, one marked with the fading male symbol and one with the female, and between them was a recessed area with 2 vending machines, both of which were completely dark. No power, or maybe they were broken, or maybe someone had just turned them off to save electricity. I couldn't tell, and I didn't particularly care because I wasn't there for snacks or drinks. I just wanted to use the bathroom and get back on the road. But something about those dark vending machines bothered me. They felt wrong, somehow. Like they were watching me even though they were just inanimate objects. I know that sounds insane, but I've learned to pay attention to these feelings. These little instinctive warnings that tell you when something isn't quite right. I've been driving long enough to know that your gut can pick up on things your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. Subtle details that add up to danger even if you can't articulate why. I pushed open the door to the men's room and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights overhead were definitely failing, buzzing loudly and creating this strobing effect where everything would be bright for a few seconds. Then dim, then bright again. It was disorienting and I had to blink a few times to adjust. The bathroom was standard institutional design. White tile walls, gray concrete floor, 3 urinals on one wall and 2 stalls on the other. A row of sinks with a long mirror above them. The place was empty. I was alone. I could see the whole room at a glance and there was no one else there. But as I walked toward the urinals, I had this weird feeling, this sensation of presence, like someone was watching me. I know that sounds paranoid, but it was distinct, unmistakable. That prickling awareness you get on the back of your neck when you're being observed. I stopped and turned around, checking the stalls. Both doors were open, both stalls clearly empty. No one there. I looked at the mirror above the sinks, half expecting to see someone reflected there who wasn't actually in the room, but it was just me, looking tired and confused and slightly spooked. I shook it off and went about my business, standing at the urinal and staring at the tile wall in front of me, trying not to think about the flickering lights, or the feeling of being watched, or the fact that I was alone in a concrete box in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. But I couldn't shake it. The sensation was too strong, too specific. Someone was watching me. I could feel it. When I finished, I washed my hands quickly, glancing at the mirror multiple times, and that's when I noticed something weird. The reflection was slightly off. Not obviously wrong, nothing dramatic, just a tiny delay, like the mirror was showing me what I'd been doing half a second ago instead of what I was doing right now. I moved my hand and watched the reflection move just a fraction behind the actual movement. I turned my head, and the reflection turned a moment later. I stood there staring at my own face in the mirror, moving my hands, tilting my head, watching the reflection lag behind by that tiny fraction of a second. It had to be the flickering lights, I thought, creating some kind of optical illusion. Or I was more tired than I realized, and my perception was off. But the more I watched, the more certain I became that the delay was real and consistent. The reflection was not quite synchronized with reality. And then, just for a moment, just for a fraction of a second when the lights dimmed during one of their flickers, I saw someone else in the mirror, someone standing behind me. I spun around, heart suddenly racing, but the bathroom was empty. No one there. I looked back at the mirror, and it was just me again, my own face looking pale and scared in the harsh fluorescent light. I got out of there fast, walked quickly to the door, pushed it open, stepped out into the cool night air. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding, and I felt ridiculous for being so spooked by a failing light fixture and my own exhausted brain playing tricks on me. I stood there for a moment, breathing, trying to calm down, telling myself I was being stupid. That's when I noticed the trucks. The 3 trucks that had been parked when I arrived were still there, but they looked different somehow. I couldn't immediately identify what was wrong. I just knew something was off. I walked closer, squinting in the dim light from the overhead lamps, and that's when I realized what it was. The trucks were identical to each other. Same make, same model, same color, same wear patterns on the paint, same mud splatter on the wheel wells, same company logo on the doors. Not similar. Identical, like someone had parked the same truck in 3 different spots, or like I was seeing triple, or like reality had stuttered and duplicated something it should have only rendered once. I walked up to the nearest one and looked at the license plate. Nebraska plates, same number as my own truck. I checked the second truck. Same plate. Third truck, same plate. All 3 trucks had the exact same license plate number, which was also my license plate number. I stood there in the parking lot trying to process this, trying to come up with any rational explanation. Some kind of optical illusion. No, I could walk around the trucks, examine them from different angles, and they remained consistently identical. A weird coincidence? Not possible. Not with the same license plates. A prank? Who would even do this, and how and why? My brain was refusing to accept what I was seeing because it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense, and yet there it was. Undeniable. 3 identical trucks, all of them exactly the same as mine. All parked at a rest stop where I'd never seen another person despite coming here dozens of times over the course of a decade. I walked back to my truck, the real one, at least I thought it was the real one, and climbed into the cab. I was going to leave, I decided. I was going to start the engine and get back on the highway and drive away from this place and never think about it again. But as I reached for the ignition, I glanced at my rearview mirror and froze. There was a truck behind me. Another truck, identical to mine, parked directly behind my parking spot in a position where it would block me from leaving. It hadn't been there when I'd parked. I was sure of it. I'd backed into the spot, and there had been nothing but empty pavement behind me. But now there was a truck there. Same as all the others, same as mine. I watched it in the mirror for a long moment, waiting for something to happen. For someone to get out, or for the truck to move, or for anything that would make this make sense. Nothing happened. The truck just sat there, engine off, lights off, no sign of a driver or any movement at all. I could still drive out forward, I realized. The spot in front of me was clear. I could just pull forward and swing around and head back to the highway. I turned the key and the engine started, loud in the silence, and I put it in gear and began to ease forward. That's when I saw the man. He was standing in front of my truck, directly in my path, maybe 10 feet ahead. He hadn't been there a second ago. I would have seen him when I looked forward to plan my exit route. But now he was there, standing perfectly still, facing the truck, his features hard to make out in the glare of my headlights. I stopped, put the truck back in neutral, waited. The man didn't move. He just stood there facing me, a dark silhouette against the bright headlights. I couldn't see his face, couldn't see any details, just his outline. Average height, average build, wearing what looked like a jacket and jeans, nothing distinctive. I hit the horn. One short blast, the universal signal for get out of the way. The man didn't react, didn't move, didn't turn away, didn't acknowledge the horn at all. Just stood there like a statue. I tried again, longer this time. Several seconds of horn blaring into the night. Still nothing. No response, no movement. He could have been a mannequin or a cardboard cutout for all the reaction he showed. My mind was racing through options. I could try to go around him, but the parking lot wasn't that big, and I wasn't confident I could navigate around him and the other trucks without getting stuck or hitting something. I could get out and confront him, ask him to move, but every instinct I had was screaming at me not to leave the cab. I could call the police, but my phone had no signal here. It never did. This part of Nebraska was a dead zone. So I waited. Maybe he'd get bored and leave. Maybe this was some weird prank or test or I don't even know what. I sat there with the engine idling and the headlights on and watched the man stand perfectly motionless in front of my truck. After about 5 minutes, I noticed something. The man was getting closer. Not walking, not moving in any visible way, but when I looked away for a second and then looked back, he was definitely closer than he had been. Maybe a foot closer, maybe less, but closer. I watched more carefully after that, keeping my eyes locked on him, refusing to blink or look away, and for several minutes he remained exactly where he was. Then I glanced down at my dashboard to check the time, and when I looked back up, he was closer again. Maybe 2 feet closer this time. Still not moving, still standing perfectly still, but occupying a position in space that he definitely hadn't been in before. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Every rational part of my brain was trying to explain it away, trying to find some logical reason for what I was seeing. But there wasn't one. This man was moving without moving, getting closer without taking steps, approaching my truck in some way that violated the basic laws of how physical reality works. I put the truck in reverse, figuring I'd back up, swing around somehow, find another way out. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the truck that had been blocking me was closer now too. And there was someone standing next to it. Another person, same dark silhouette, same indistinct features, just standing there motionless in the dim light. I looked forward again and the man in front of me was even closer now, maybe 6 feet from my bumper, and I realized with growing horror that every time I looked away from one of them, they would move, would suddenly be in a new position without any apparent transition between the old position and the new. I looked to my left, out the driver's side window, And there was someone standing there too, right next to the door, close enough that I could have touched them if I'd opened the window. I jerked back in my seat, my heart hammering, and looked to the right. Another person there too, standing next to the passenger door. Same silhouette, same immobility. They were surrounding the truck. I could see them in my peripheral vision, standing at all the windows, and every time I looked directly at one of them they would be perfectly still. But in the corner of my eye, I could sense the others moving, shifting position, getting incrementally closer with each glance. I tried driving forward anyway. Just floored it, figuring I'd push through or around the man in front of me if I had to. But the truck barely moved. The engine roared and the wheels spun, but I only advanced maybe a foot before stopping, like I was trying to drive through mud or sand, like there was some tremendous resistance pushing back against me. I looked at the man in front of the truck and he was right there now, right up against the bumper, his hands pressed flat against the grill, and even though I still couldn't see his face clearly, I could feel him looking at me, staring directly into my eyes through the windshield. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was not human. That whatever these things were, they only looked human from a distance, and up close they were something else entirely, something that moved according to different rules and existed in a way my brain couldn't fully process. I reached for my phone even though I knew it wouldn't work, desperate for any option, any way to call for help or document what was happening or just hear another human voice even if it was just a recording. But when I looked at the screen, it showed the time as 3:47 a.m., which didn't make sense because it had been 2:35 when I'd pulled into the rest stop, and I couldn't have been here for more than 20 or 30 minutes. I looked at the dashboard clock, and it showed 3:47 a.m. I looked at my watch, and it showed 3:47 a.m. But that wasn't possible. An hour hadn't passed. Couldn't have passed. Unless I'd lost time somehow, unless there was a gap in my memory, unless something had happened that I wasn't aware of. I looked back at the windshield, and there were faces pressed against the glass now. Pale faces with dark eyes and no expression, and they were all staring at me with this intense focus like they were studying me, or waiting for something, or just existing in this moment with me in a way that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. And then I noticed the mirrors, the side mirrors, the rearview mirror. All of them were showing me different things than what I could see through the windows. The left mirror showed my truck parked in an empty lot with no other vehicles and no people. The right mirror showed dozens of trucks, hundreds maybe, filling the parking lot in impossible configurations, stacked and overlapping in ways that defied physics. The rearview mirror showed the bathroom building, but the door was open and there was light pouring out. Bright white light, brighter than any fluorescent could produce, and I could see shapes moving in that light. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Distorted. I closed my eyes. I don't know what else to do. I just closed my eyes and sat there in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, and I tried to think of anything else. Tried to imagine being somewhere safe. Tried to remember what it felt like to be in control of my situation. When I opened them again, everything was normal. The sun was coming up, pale light spreading across the parking lot, and I was alone. No other trucks, no people, no faces at the windows. Just me and my truck in an empty rest area with dawn breaking over the Nebraska prairie. I checked the time. 6:14 a.m. More than 3 hours had passed. 3 hours that I couldn't account for. 3 hours of sitting in my truck with my eyes closed while something happened around me that I don't remember and don't want to remember. I started the engine and drove away. Didn't stop to use the bathroom again. Didn't stop to figure out what had happened. Just got back on the highway and drove until I reached Salt Lake City. I made my delivery, checked into a hotel, and slept for 16 hours straight. When I woke up, I checked my phone and found a voicemail from my dispatcher asking where I was, saying I'd missed my delivery window by 4 hours and asking if everything was okay. But that didn't make sense because I'd arrived on time. I was sure of it. I'd delivered the load and signed the paperwork and watched them unload the truck. Except when I checked my delivery confirmation app, there was no record of the delivery. According to my GPS history, I'd driven straight from the rest area to the hotel without stopping at the warehouse. 4 hours late, just like my dispatcher said. But I remember unloading. I remember signing the paperwork. I remember talking to the guy at the loading dock about the weather. I have memories of doing these things, clear, detailed memories, but apparently they never happened. I tried to piece together what was real and what wasn't, but I couldn't make it fit. Something had happened at that rest stop. Something that had scrambled my timeline and my memories and my sense of reality. Something that had taken 3 hours of my life and replaced them with false memories and confusion. I never told anyone about it. How could I? What would I even say? That I stopped at a rest area and lost time and saw impossible things, and now I'm not sure what actually happened. They'd think I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing, or that I had some kind of breakdown, or that I was using drugs. And maybe they'd be right. Maybe it was all just exhaustion and hallucination and my brain misfiring from too many nights with too little sleep. But I don't think so. I think something real happened at that rest stop. Something outside the normal flow of reality. And I walked into it without knowing. And I'm lucky I walked back out at all. I drive past mile marker 412 regularly. My routes haven't changed, and that rest area is still there. Still the most convenient stopping point on that particular stretch of highway. But I don't stop anymore. I see the sign, I see the exit, and I keep driving. I hold my bladder and push through to the next stop even if it's inconvenient. Because I know what's waiting there in that parking lot. In that bathroom with the flickering lights and the mirror that shows you what you were instead of what you are. The trucks are still there. Every time I drive past, usually around 3 in the morning, I can see them down in that little valley, parked in their spots. Identical vehicles in a row. Sometimes there are 3, sometimes 4, sometimes as many as 6. They're always the same make and model as mine. I don't know if they're always there or if they only appear at certain times, but they're there every time I look. And sometimes, if I glance down at exactly the right moment, I can see a figure standing in the parking lot. Just one, usually standing perfectly still in a position where they could be looking up at the highway, watching the trucks drive by, waiting for someone to stop. I talked to some other drivers about that rest area. Casual conversations at truck stops and loading docks, asking if they'd ever stopped there, if they'd noticed anything weird. Most of them had never even heard of it, which is strange because it's right there on I-80, clearly marked, impossible to miss. A few remembered seeing the exit but couldn't recall ever taking it. One guy, older driver who'd been running these routes for 30 years, just looked at me hard when I asked and said, "Don't stop there. Ever. Just don't." I asked him why, and he said, "Same reason you're asking me about it," and walked away. So I'm not the only one. Whatever happens there, whatever that place is, I'm not the first person to experience it. And that's somehow worse than if it had just been me, if it had just been my own personal hallucination or breakdown. Because it means the place is real and consistent, and it's still there, still doing whatever it does to people who stop there in the middle of the night. I think about those 3 hours I lost. I think about what I might have done during that time, where I might have gone, what might have happened to me while my conscious mind was closed off behind my eyelids. Did I get out of the truck? Did I go back into that bathroom? Did I see something in those mirrors that my brain couldn't process, and so it just deleted the memories to protect me? Or did nothing happen at all? Did I just sit there for 3 hours while time moved differently around me? while I existed in some pocket of reality where the normal rules didn't apply and 3 hours could pass in what felt like 5 minutes. I don't know. I'll never know. And that uncertainty is worse than any concrete truth could be. What I do know is that place is wrong. That rest stop, mile marker 412, westbound on I-80 in the middle of Nebraska, where there's nothing for miles except darkness and cornfields and the occasional grain silo breaking up the horizon. It's wrong in a fundamental way. Wrong in a way that makes reality bend around it. And it's waiting there for people like me, people who are tired and alone and just need a 5-minute break from the road. And if you're ever driving through Nebraska late at night and you see that exit, mile marker 412, with the sign that says Rest Area 2 miles, I'm telling you right now, don't take it. Keep driving. Hold whatever you need to hold. Drink less coffee. Plan your route better, whatever you have to do. Because if you stop there, if you park in that lot and walk into that bathroom and look into those mirrors, you might not come back out the same person you were when you went in. You might lose time or memories or some fundamental piece of yourself that you didn't even know could be taken. Or you might not come back out at all. You might end up like those trucks in the parking lot. Identical copies of something that was once real, waiting in the dark for someone else to join you. I still drive at night. I still run the same routes, still haul the same loads from city to city across the endless American highway system. But I'm more careful now about where I stop. I'm more attentive to the feeling I get when I pull into a place, whether it feels right or wrong, whether the lights look normal or slightly off, whether there are other people around, or if I'm inexplicably alone despite multiple vehicles being present. Because I've learned that not all rest stops are equal. Some of them exist in the normal world, clean or dirty, well-maintained or falling apart, but basically mundane and safe. And some of them exist somewhere else, somewhere adjacent to our reality, but not quite part of it. And if you're unlucky enough to stop at one of those places when the conditions are right and reality is thin enough for you to slip through, you might find yourself in a situation that your brain wasn't designed to handle. That's what happened to me at mile marker 412. I slipped through somehow, ended up in a version of that rest stop that wasn't quite real, and I spent 3 hours there that I can't remember in a situation my conscious mind refused to process. And I'm lucky, incredibly lucky, that I made it back. That when I opened my eyes, the sun was coming up, and I was alone and I could just drive away and pretend it never happened. But it did happen. And it's still happening, probably to other drivers who stop there without knowing what they're walking into. And there's nothing I can do about it except warn people, tell my story to anyone who'll listen, and hope that maybe someone will believe me and avoid that place and not make the same mistake I did. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm telling you. Mile marker 412, I-80 westbound, Nebraska. Don't stop there. Don't even look at it if you can help it. Just keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel and drive past it as fast as you can. Because whatever is waiting there in that parking lot, in that bathroom with the flickering lights, in those mirrors that show you things that aren't quite right, it's patient. It's been there for years, probably decades, and it'll be there for years more. And it's waiting for you to stop, waiting for you to walk through that door and look into that mirror and realize too late that you've made a terrible mistake. Don't be the next person to learn that lesson. Don't be the next truck parked in that lot with no driver to be found. Don't be the next story that other truckers tell late at night at rest stops. The next cautionary tale. The next person who disappeared into something they couldn't understand and never came back. Just drive past. It's that simple. See the exit, stay in your lane, and keep going. Whatever you need, whatever you think you can't live without for another hour, you can wait. Trust me on this. You can wait. Because the alternative is stopping at mile marker 412, and I promise you, absolutely promise you with everything I have, that's not a mistake you want to make. That's not an experience you want to have. That's not a memory you want to carry with you for the rest of your life, wondering what really happened during those lost hours, and what might still be happening there every night when the sun goes down and the rest stop lights flicker on. The trucks will still be there. The bathroom will still be open. The mirrors will still show you things that aren't quite synchronized with reality. And if you're unlucky, if you stop at exactly the wrong time in exactly the wrong way, you'll find out what's behind those reflections. And I don't think you want to know. I know I don't. I never did figure out what those faces were, or what they wanted, or why they surrounded my truck in that parking lot. I never understood where those 3 hours went, or what I did during them, or why my memories don't match the records. All I know is that I don't stop at mile marker 412 anymore, and neither should you. That's the only wisdom I have to offer. That's the only lesson I learned from that night. Some places are wrong, and you should stay away from them. And if you accidentally stumble into one of them, you should count yourself lucky if you get out again with nothing worse than lost time and confusion. Because it could always be worse. It can always be so much worse. And I think somewhere in those 3 hours I don't remember, I found out just how much worse it can be. My brain just did me the favor of forgetting it, of protecting me from knowledge I wasn't equipped to handle. So I'm grateful for that, at least. Grateful that I don't remember. Grateful that I can still drive and work and function like a normal person instead of being crippled by whatever truth is waiting in that rest stop for anyone foolish enough to look for it. And I'm telling you this story not because I want to scare you, but because I want to protect you. Because if even one person reads this and decides not to stop at mile marker 412, then maybe I've saved them from making my mistake. Maybe I've kept them from losing 3 hours they'll never get back, from seeing things in mirrors that don't make sense, from being surrounded by figures that move when you're not looking. That's worth it, I think. Worth sharing my story. Worth risking people thinking I'm crazy or lying or making it all up for attention. Because I know it's real, and I know it's still out there. And I know someone else is going to stop there eventually if they haven't already. And when they do, when they walk into that bathroom and see their reflection lag behind their movements and notice someone standing behind them who isn't actually there, maybe they'll remember this story. Maybe they'll remember that someone else experienced something similar and survived. Maybe that will give them the courage or the clarity or whatever they need to get out before it's too late. Or maybe they won't remember. Maybe they'll lose 3 hours just like I did, and they'll drive away confused and shaken and unable to explain what happened. And maybe years from now they'll be telling someone else about the weird rest stop on I-80, where they lost time and saw impossible things, and the cycle will continue. But at least I tried. At least I warned people. At least I said, as clearly as I could, that mile marker 412 is wrong, and you should stay away from it. That's all I can do. The rest is up to you. Just promise me one thing. If you're ever driving through Nebraska late at night, and you see that exit, mile marker 412, rest area 2 miles, promise me you'll keep driving. Promise me you won't make the same mistake I did. Promise me you'll stay on the highway and find another place to stop, even if it's inconvenient. Even if you really need a bathroom or a break or just a moment to stretch your legs. Promise me you won't stop at mile marker 412. Because I can't save you if you do, and I can't protect you from what's waiting there. And I can't bring back the time you'll lose or the memories you'll gain, or the version of yourself that will walk away from that place changed in ways you won't understand until it's far too late. Just keep driving. That's all. Just keep driving, and maybe you'll make it through Nebraska without losing anything you can't afford to lose. Maybe you'll reach your destination on time with all your memories intact and no gaps in your timeline that you can't explain. Maybe you'll be luckier than I was. I hope you are, I really do, because nobody should have to experience what I experienced at that rest stop, and nobody should have to carry the weight of those lost hours and that uncertainty and that persistent feeling that something happened that was so wrong, so fundamentally incompatible with normal reality, that your own brain had to erase it just to let you keep functioning. That's my story. That's my warning. Mile marker 412, I-80 westbound, Nebraska. It's still there, it's still wrong, and it's still waiting for the next person to stop. Don't let that person be you. There's a stretch of highway in Wyoming, Route 287 between Lander and Rollins, that doesn't make sense. I spent 11 hours driving the same 30-mile stretch over and over again last winter, and I'm still not sure how I got out or if I actually got out at all. Maybe I'm still there, still driving, and this is just a dream. That's what that night did to me. It broke my confidence in basic reality. I've been a trucker for 8 years now. Started at 29 after getting laid off. The work is solitary, but I found it peaceful, at least at first. Now, I think all that time alone has worn down the barriers between what's real and what's not. This happened in January, middle of the month, during one of those brutal cold snaps where the temperature drops to 20 below and the air feels brittle when you breathe. I was hauling automotive parts from Denver to Billings, Montana, a time-sensitive load where delays would cost the company thousands per hour. No pressure, right? I left Denver around 7 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive around noon. The route took me north through Wyoming on 287, not a major highway, but the most direct path. Usually, it's empty at night, so you can make good time. The weather forecast mentioned possible snow, but nothing severe. The first few hours were fine. I made it through Fort Collins and Laramie without problems, grabbed coffee at a gas station in Rollins around 11 p.m., then headed west on 287 toward Lander. This is the stretch I'm talking about. Roughly 120 miles of empty highway cutting through high desert and mountain passes. Nothing out there except sagebrush and the occasional ranch road leading into darkness. No towns, no services, just the road. I'd driven this section so many times it was automatic. I knew every curve, every grade, every place where the wind would hit you sideways. I could practically drive it with my eyes closed, which is a dangerous thought because complacency kills on the road. But that's how familiar it felt. The snow started around midnight. Just a few flakes at first, but within 20 minutes it was coming down steadily and accumulating. I slowed down, turned on the wipers, and kept going. I've driven in worse. Wyoming. Winter weather is unpredictable, but this didn't seem like anything I couldn't handle. I was somewhere between mile marker 45 and 46 when I first noticed something was off. I'd been watching the markers to track my progress, just keeping an eye on them out of habit, and I saw mile marker 45 go by on the right side of the road. Standard green sign with white lettering, nothing unusual. I kept driving, maybe another minute or two, and then I saw mile marker 45 again. At first, I thought I'd misread the first one, but no, I definitely remembered seeing 45 clearly. So, seeing it again didn't make sense unless I'd somehow turned around, but I hadn't. I'd been driving in a straight line, no exits or turnoffs. I decided I'd just been mistaken and kept driving. A few minutes later I passed mile marker 46, then 47. The markers were coming at regular intervals now, and I started to relax. Just tired, I thought. Then I passed mile marker 45 again, no mistaking it this time. I slowed down as I approached it, really looked at it clearly, confirmed that, yes, it definitely said 45, which meant I'd gone from 47 back to 45 somehow, which meant something fundamentally impossible was happening. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the truck in park and just sat there for a minute trying to think. The snow was coming down heavier now, thick, wet flakes that stuck to the windshield, and the wipers were working overtime to keep it clear. I couldn't see much beyond the immediate reach of my headlights, just swirling white and the dark shapes of hills in the distance. No other vehicles, no lights from buildings or towns, nothing that would help me orient myself. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, figuring that would at least tell me where I was and whether I'd somehow gotten turned around. But the GPS showed me exactly where I expected to be, on Route 287 between Rollins and Lander, making steady progress north. According to the GPS, I was near mile marker 53, which didn't match what I'd just seen at all. The GPS said 53, the physical marker said 45, and I had no idea which one to trust. I considered calling my dispatcher, but it was the middle of the night, and I didn't want to wake him up with what might just be my own confusion. So I decided to keep going and pay closer attention. I pulled back onto the highway and continued north. The snow was really coming down now, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. I watched carefully for the next marker. There it was, mile marker 46. Okay, I thought, that makes sense. 45, then 46, progressing normally, then 47, then 48. All coming at reasonable intervals, all in the right order. I started to relax. Whatever weirdness I'd experienced was over. Then mile marker 45 appeared again, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that something was very wrong. I had definitely passed 45, then 46, 47, and 48, and now I was back at 45 again. I was looping, somehow, caught in some kind of spatial anomaly where the road kept folding back on itself. I pulled over again, this time more urgently, feeling the first real stirrings of panic in my chest. I checked the GPS and it showed me near mile marker 59 now, still progressing north as if everything was normal. But the physical markers were telling a different story. I was stuck at mile marker 45 and couldn't get past it no matter how far I drove. I sat there with the engine idling and tried to think logically. Roads don't loop on themselves unless they're designed that way, and this was a straight highway. Mile markers don't repeat unless there's been an error in placement. This wasn't possible unless I was hallucinating or the fundamental structure of reality was breaking down in this location. I decided to turn around and head back, take a different route. Forget the tight schedule. I just wanted to get out of this stretch of highway and find somewhere that made sense again. I turned around and headed south. The snow seemed even heavier going this direction, or maybe I was just more anxious. I watched the mile markers carefully as I passed them. 45, 404, 43, 42. Going backwards now, which was right, which meant I was heading away from whatever strangeness I'd encountered. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, passing marker after marker in descending order, starting to feel a sense of relief. Then I saw a marker that said 45 again, and I realized with horror that I was back where I'd started, that somehow going south had eventually brought me back to mile marker 45, that I was trapped in this loop no matter which direction I drove. I pulled over yet again, and this time I got out of the truck. I needed to see the marker up close, confirm with my own eyes that it really said what I thought it said. I walked through the falling snow to the marker, my boots crunching on the accumulating white. And yes, there it was. Mile marker 45, solid and real and undeniable. I looked north along the highway and saw nothing but snow and darkness and the faint glow of my truck's headlights. I looked south and saw the same thing. No other lights, no other vehicles, no landmarks I could use to orient myself. just the highway stretching in both directions through the storm. I got back in the truck and tried calling my dispatcher. The call wouldn't go through. No signal. I tried calling anyone. Emergency services, my brother, random numbers I could remember, but nothing connected. The phone showed full bars, but every call failed immediately. I tried the radio and got only static. The CB was silent. I was completely isolated, cut off from any form of communication, alone on a highway that didn't follow normal rules. I started driving north again because I didn't know what else to do. Maybe if I kept going long enough, I'd break through whatever was causing this loop. The snow was piling up now, getting deep enough that I could feel the truck working harder to push through it, and I knew that soon the road would be impassable. Mile markers 45, 46, 47, 48 passed. I kept counting, trying to memorize the order. 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. I started to feel hopeful. Maybe I'd broken free, maybe whatever had been causing the loop was over. 54, 55, 56. I was making progress, real, measurable progress, getting farther from mile marker 45 with each passing minute. Then I saw a sign up ahead, barely visible through the snow. A green highway sign. As I got closer, I could make out the text. Lander, 45 miles. Which didn't make sense because I'd been driving for over an hour, and I should be much closer to Lander than that. Unless I hadn't actually been making progress, unless those mile markers I'd been passing weren't real or weren't in the right locations. I kept driving, now completely disoriented, having no idea how far I'd actually come or where I actually was. The GPS still showed me progressing north, but I didn't trust it anymore. The mile markers said one thing, the GPS said another, and my sense of distance and time was completely scrambled. Mile marker 45 appeared again. I didn't even pull over this time. I just kept driving, numb now, accepting that I was stuck in this loop and there was nothing I could do about it. 46, 47, 48. The same sequence I'd driven a dozen times already. How many times had I passed mile marker 45? 20? 30? I'd lost count. The snow was getting worse. Visibility was down to maybe 20 feet now, and the road was covered in several inches of white that made it hard to tell where the pavement ended and the shoulder began. I was going barely 20 miles per hour, fighting to keep the truck on the road, genuinely worried about getting stuck or sliding off into a ditch. That's when I saw the other truck. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, parked on the shoulder facing the wrong direction, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. I slowed down as I approached it, feeling a surge of relief because this meant I wasn't alone anymore. There was another driver out here who might be able to help me. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was a semi, same type as mine, same color scheme, same company logo on the door. Actually, it looked exactly like mine. Same model, same year by the look of it. Same wear patterns on the paint, same mud flaps. I pulled up next to it and stopped, my heart starting to race because I knew what this meant. I was looking at my own truck. Somehow, impossibly, my truck was parked on the side of the road ahead of me, which meant I was in two places at once, or time was looping in addition to space, and I'd somehow caught up to a previous version of myself. I sat there staring at the other truck, my truck, watching its hazard lights blink. This was impossible. But it was happening. It was right there in front of me, undeniable. I thought about getting out and looking inside, seeing if there was someone in the cab, seeing if that someone was me. But I couldn't make myself do it. If I looked and saw myself sitting there, staring back at me through the window, what would that mean? Would both versions of me be real? Would one of us disappear? I didn't want to find out. So I drove past it, accelerated away from my own parked truck, and kept going north through the snow and the darkness and the repeating mile markers. 45, 6, 47, 48, over and over. I'd been driving for hours now, maybe 11 or 12 based on what my clock said, though I wasn't sure I could trust the clock anymore. Time felt wrong here, stretched and compressed and looping back on itself just like the space was. I started seeing more trucks that looked like mine, parked at odd angles on the shoulder or in the middle of the road or facing the wrong direction. Some had their lights on, some were dark. I drove past all of them without stopping. I didn't want to know who or what was in those trucks. I didn't want to see another version of myself, or worse, something wearing my face that wasn't quite me. Mile markers kept repeating. 45, 46, 47, 48 over and over. I tried everything, driving with eyes closed, stopping for an hour, even attempting to go off-road. Nothing worked. I always ended up back at mile marker 45. Then the snow stopped. Dawn broke. I could finally see clearly. I was on Route 287. Everything looked normal. The mile markers were in the right order now. I was near marker 75, well past where I'd been stuck. I checked my fuel gauge, 3/4 full, but I should have burned through most of a tank during those 11 hours. My clock showed 5:47 a.m. Only 8 hours had passed since Rollins, which was correct for the distance, but felt wrong because I knew I'd been stuck for 11 hours. My GPS history showed I'd driven straight through without stopping. No record of those 11 hours existed. According to every objective measure, they hadn't happened. But I remember them. I remember seeing mile marker 45 dozens of times, seeing my own truck ahead of me. Those memories are real, so what happened? Did I drive through some spatial anomaly? Did 11 hours pass in just minutes? Or are these memories false, created by exhaustion? I don't know. I made my delivery on time. No one noticed anything wrong. Only I remember the loop. I still drive Route 287, but never at night, never in snow. I watch the mile markers carefully. So far, the highway has behaved normally. But I know that stretch between markers 45 and 75 is wrong, that there's a trap waiting for drivers who pass through at the wrong time. When you break free, if you break free, no one will believe you. Your GPS will show a normal route. Your fuel gauge, normal consumption. The only proof will be your memories, and those aren't enough to convince anyone. So I'm telling you. If you're driving Route 287 in Wyoming between Lander and Rollins, watch the mile markers. If you see the same marker twice, turn around immediately. Don't try to push through. Because I don't know if you'll get out. I don't know if I really got out, or if I'm still there, still driving past mile marker 45 while thinking I've moved on. That's what that night did to me. It broke my certainty about what's real. And if you get stuck on that highway, seeing your own truck parked ahead of you, counting hours that don't exist, remember that someone else experienced this before you. Remember, you might get out, but you might not be the same afterward. You might lose your confidence in basic reality. You might spend the rest of your life wondering if you ever really escaped at all. Mile marker 45. If you see it twice, turn around. That's all the wisdom I have. That's the only lesson I learned from those 11 hours that maybe never happened at all.